Pour écouter cette session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet Interprétation et sélectionner le drapeau français.
Hello, bonjour.
Habari za leo.
On behalf of Equalise Africa, the Africa Centre for Cities, Our Future Cities,
Surge Africa and the Red Cross Crescent Climate Centre,
We are delighted to welcome you to the Rise Africa 2023 Action Festival.
Rise Africa is a platform that brings together thinkers, doers, and enablers
to inspire action for sustainable cities.
This is the third edition of our virtual festival.
it brings together insights, practices, and visions from across the continent.
This year's theme is The Cities We Want.
the cities we want.
the cities we want.
The cities we want.
This mirrors the African Union 2063 Agenda vision, the Africa we want.
It is a wonderful Pan-African call for transformative change.
However, the agenda does not adequately embrace urbanization as a potential positive force for improving prosperity, inclusivity, and environmental well-being on the continent.
We need more emphasis on the role of cities and local action. And this festival aims to provide inputs into this agenda.
The cities we have are
Expanding,
incomplete,
inventive,
contested,
facing impending crisis, yet brimming with potential.
The cities we want are
people-centered,
Safe and healthy.
beacons of culture,
unflinchingly modern.
And adapting to change and leading global innovation.
We'll make these cities through
Experimenting,
learning
collaborating,
and amplifying the everyday actions of people who are shaping their cities.
The festival invites you to embrace different ways of knowing,
It invites you to forge new partnerships,
Experiment with new concepts and ideas.
to seek ways to bridge science, business, policy, and the arts.
Together, let's enter this space in the spirit of poetic possibilities.
À l'encre de mon sang, au papier de ma langue, à mes yeux qui tanguent lentement dans le vide, rêvant un jour de laisser des traces de regard sur les villes que nous voulons et imaginons au-delà des vers. Entre deux effluves, mon être crie utopie, mon cœur murmure héritage. Mon âme, elle, chante avenir. De villes riches de leur multiplicité, multiples dans leur diversité, unique pluralité niée hier s'est avancée vers un demain déjà avorté. Enracinement certes, mais ouverture dans ce village planétaire, laisser les sens alertes et réagir. Entendre la cacophonie banalisée des inégalités sociétales criardes laissées en fond sonore, voir et questionner le décor, bâtir et consentir à l'action qui sépare le rêve de la réalité. Sentir la fragrance vitale, belle et verte, inévitable baume au cœur, accepter notre responsabilité de léguer à nos enfants un monde en bonne santé. Démocratiser le goût, que plus aucun palais, d'aucune bouche, d'aucun enfant, d'aucun pays ne soit plus jamais sec. Démocratiser le goût des rêves, des voyages qui s'exécutent quel que soit l'âge, le long des pages, au fil des chapitres, sur le pupitre de la connaissance, seul germe du choix. Toucher l'idée d'infrastructure qui marche allègrement sur le chemin de l'innovation. Enracinement certes, mais ouverture dans ce village planétaire. Laisser les sens alertes, mais surtout réagir.
Welcome to Rise Africa Action Festival. We are absolutely thrilled to have you circling with us and look forward to your engagement with us. Please drop your of the locations that you are coming through from. We have been very excited journey from day 1 into day 2 and even has come round. We have a beautiful array of speakers and hope you will engage with us into this discussion. We'll also be sharing some information in the chat, but let's not lose that sense of the poetic entry into this conversation. Different ways of weaving our story, as you have experienced with Samira Falls, a visual introduction to other ways of telling the story through image. Just to begin, I want to start with a present moment, and also above the nagging city drone, clogging this weathered city zone, even as I weave my way through a buzzing taxi rank talent trap amidst smoke and hissing primer stoves, smoke and suited humans, hissing primer stoves, people in droves who seldom look up. Look up. This morning is new, no matter where or when we wake up. This morning is new, no matter what we do. This moment is new, no matter when we wake up, no matter what we do. This moment is new. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's new. It's new. Ooh. It's new. Look. And now I invite Luca to share with us a range of perspectives through the lens of photographers who have done an urban perspective through their lenses and from their hearts as to images of the city they see, the city they want to dream into being. Thank you, Luca.
Good morning there, everyone. Am I coming through? Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yes.
Fantastic. So yes, my name is Luca Dreyer, and I've recently begun working at Equalise Africa, and I've had the privilege this year of running this year's Rise Africa photography and multimedia competition. And it has been truly astounding to see the variety of submissions that we received this year, representing the multitude of visions that people across the continent have for the cities we want, not only in the form of photographs, but sketches, collages, digital art, and sometimes all of these coming together in the same submission. And so without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to present to you the 10 shortlisted submissions for this year's Rise Africa Photography and Multimedia competition.
keeping those beautiful images in mind as we journey into this conversation. Thank you, Luca. Towards the end of the session, we'll be able to have a look at the shortlist and then the winner being announced. Those images express an inhabiting and a desire to play, to live, to own the space that is the city. And these 3 days are very much about circling around that question of what is a modern African city? How does its robustness and its fragilities and challenges come together? How do these resources we are when we inhabit them, or the existing resources already are there for us to harness? How do we recognize them? How do we access them for the dream of where we want those cities to be? What kinds of collaboration need to happen in that space? So as part of this generating of the conversation, I want to invite us to think about the messiness of that middle space, working with the cities that we have, all those challenges included, the kinds of collaborative conversations, top down, bottom up. What is that middle space in which those partnerships can be generative towards the collaborative visions and safe spaces that we hope or dream these cities to be? And to embrace that sense of an abundance rather than a sense of lack, to be thinking about that in-between space as a space of fertility, of potentially underutilized possibilities, spaces that may in some ways be no longer tolerable, therefore at a threshold, some kind of emergent space in which new possibilities for sustainability, if the ones that exist don't serve us in that way, opportunities for dynamic storytelling. We have to have narratives that reel that dream in. What are the stories we've been telling ourselves for such a long time that no longer serve? What are the stories that different people who inhabit the city or call it home, call it the place that is at the heart of what they spend their time and energy doing? What are the stories they are bringing into that space? Are we listening to them? How do we identify and support their participation in that story weaving? What is the excavation work that we need to do about those resources that are already there? And how do these stories mirror and reflect the possibility of that sky, that open canvas that my poem spoke to about, looking up, away, turning a little away from the familiar, what we think we've already resolved or mapped or strategized around and just need to implement? What is that moment before where we can embrace the stories that are emerging and ask the kinds of questions that bring new voices into that conversation? And on that note, I would like to invite the first of our wonderful speakers, Dr. Cecil Medell. Please, can you join us just to drop a few of your seeds into that soil, turning it for us so that we can move into a deeper and wider conversation with everyone in this room. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Monica. Thanks very much for the invitation. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I've sort of tried to put my thoughts and ideas on a piece of paper. I'm glad to see Catherine is here because I'm quite sure she'll have excellent images as a fellow urbanist. So I'm going to go through it, and then I suppose this sort of reflects my sort of understanding where we are in Africa around cities, and obviously, I suppose, as a practitioner, as an academic. So when listening at the sort of past sort of mainstream media and on about the African continent, cities are routinely described as experiencing high levels of urbanization, fueled by rapid migration from rural to primary urban centers and secondary towns, and characterized by informalization, inadequate and poor housing, public facilities, transportation infrastructure, insufficient energy provision, and polarized development, which I think is probably quite critical in terms of how inequality is manifested in our cities and our continent. And that is very clear from the urban suburbs and gated estates for the healthy, vis-a-vis the townships and squatter camps for the urban and rural poor. The pitiable management of urban settlements, corruption and political expediency, political discontent and urban violence, gender-based violence, discrimination, high levels of vulnerability due to widespread exposure to poverty and environmental hazards. And so what we do see is that our past is really littered with colonial, apartheid, Western and modernized city building practices. And we can see by the different way our cities have been constructed by the British, the Dutch, the French, from Belgium, Portuguese, and more recently Chinese and Asian, so we can see it from our towns and villages, our Bantustans, our suburbians, our new towns, which is exclusive only for those that can afford it. And then also the way we've designed our neighborhoods and towns from sort of emulating military grids to sometimes garden cities, neighborhood units, WOONers, new traditional planning, transit-oriented development, but then more recently construction of construction camps for infrastructure, but also the history of our mining towns, our very metropolises that are becoming more informal, and really more recently the kind of fantasy-driven notion of fantasy cities, which a colleague, Vanessa Watson, used to talk about quite a lot at PAS now, in Kigali, Lagos, Kwanza. And these places are really, in summary, these places are really gearing at exporting Africa's massive natural resources, economically exploiting its inhabitants, and cushioning the collaborative wealthy and elites. But also wealth and elite are cushioned in terms of how we structure, design, and manage our cities. However, for the majority of Africans, these places are by and large economically exclusionary, socially unjust, and in conflict with nature. So in terms of what is our vision for Africa? And so I'm arguing that perhaps we should be looking at, look far in the past, as well as far in the future to imagine a different Africa. And so the first building block I would argue around the notion of Mother Africa, an Africa that is harmony with nature, with its unique natural resources, with its diverse climatic zones and majestic mountains, its valleys, its rivers, its lakes, its deserts, its rainforests, savannas, coastal plains and seas, and its countless national parks, right across the continent, which is unique flora and fauna, from Etosha to Kruger to Serengeti. We all kind of been exposed to some of that. The mighty rivers and lakes across the continent, the deserts, Sahara, Namib, Kalahari. And these constitute the green living lungs of the continent, our planet, free from destruction and exploitation, source of livelihood, culture, health, and well-being. And then the second building block, I think, is really just securing our home, our natural environment, our Mother Africa, as we like to refer to it. Then secondly is our people, celebrating our diversity of people, with its more than 3,000 different ethnic groups, more than 2,100 different languages, and really living the Declaration of Human Rights, the SDGs in Africa 2063, freedom of speech, of movement and association, equality before the law, peace, social engagement, freedom from poverty, hunger, exploitation, and wars, the right to decent work, dignity and respect, food security, decent shelter, clean water, sanitation, renewable energy with minimal carbon impact. The right to education, learning and skilling knowledge, sharing grounded and intricately linked to the motherland's natural resources, people and trading opportunities. Very active citizenry at both household, street, community, district, region and national levels. Capable and accountable governance and ethical statesmanship, leadership, decentralized decision-making within the frame of broader public good and an integrated and politically united Africa. Then a prosperous people, diversity of economic activity, focusing on our indigenous resources that meets the needs of Africans, generating wealth that is sustainable and driven by economic growth as well as inclusive development. And then the last and third component building block is places, which is Africa as our home, where places of natural, spiritual, cultural struggle and necessary parts can be celebrated and enjoyed by all, from the Great Pyramids and ancient Nile Valley to the Yoruba cities of Western Africa, to North African sportsy cities, Tunisia, Cairo, etc. So Southern Africans is the traditional settlements from Grand Zimbabwe to Bulawayo, etc. And I really envision a continent with wide networks of medium and small settlements connected through secondary roads and railway networks. So less kind of emphasis on freeways. I think we need that as a mobility network, but more closer mobility, people can connect and maybe smaller and more diverse cities as opposed to larger and exclusionary cities. but then closely knit through kinship, culture, friendship, and community. One way movement, economic and social networks between African cities, towns, and villages. There's greater movement between within the continent, and that should be more than external with connection and or rather movement with former colonial and contemporary geopolitical and Western powers. Neighbors where people can relate and support each other, places where they can meet and exchange ideas and learn from each other, and really an urban and rural continuum in production, wealth creation, and sharing. A society that embraces elements of modernism that works for the majority of its people. So we know things like smartphones, broadband, internet, fast and efficient public transportation, and modern medicine practices that also embrace traditional natural remedies and so on. So it's not rejecting modernism, but finding it elements that works for us. And in conclusion, what we want is an Africa and a continent and cities where people can live, work, socialize, celebrate, a continent that embraces nature, reflects the cultural and lively needs of its inhabitants, engage with the wider world, and where its people can prosper, grow, and thrive in an ever-changing globalized world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecil. That's a very encompassing, well done for having to offer that in a nugget form. Some of the things that I particularly want to kind of surface is this notion of time. We started out talking about past, present, future, and you spoke to that so beautifully in a really textured way around how not only is the wealth of the past still very present and accessible to us through heritage, natural resources, etc., but also that the indigenous knowledge systems speak to a spiraling version of time, not a linear colonial one that says the past is done, we are amputated from it and we can't use that, or we have to basically reinvent from ground zero, which is to basically deny the resources and also continue the erasure that has already existed. So I'm really thankful for that visual of the sense of a spirally time, and also going back to the restorative practice of slowing down enough to build authentic community, of being able to really, as I said, who are those stories? Who are the ones carrying the stories that we need to be listening to and asking to contribute to that new narrative, or renewed rather, because it's never from day one. Thank you so much for your input. Next, I would like to invite Professor Omar Dagan, and please take your time. We are working with slow and fast time. Thank you so much.
No, thanks to you, and thanks for having me. I think we raised a few interesting points in here. But one thing that is very important for me, despite us talking about cities, is the fact that you can't divide the identity of the city from the rural areas themselves. So they're extremely interconnected. And if we always consider the cities or the urbanized areas as the brain, well, the rural areas are definitely the arms and the legs of this body. And I think often actually, one of the main issue is actually between this connectivity, this interconnectivity between the two sides of it. And we recently see a lot, and we spoke often about fastest growing cities, mega cities, the Africa urbanizations, and all of that. In fact, according to the data, by 2050, 2.5 billion people more will live in city worldwide, and of this 2.5 billion, 90% will be between Africa and Asia, which is a very important data. But playing with numbers, despite not being my subject in that sense, there is around 1 billion people that live in slum worldwide nowadays, right? So out of 7 billion people, 8 billion people almost, right, we're going to reach, that's a big number. And that's a very important point to rise, because why we have these slums, why the quality of lives in cities is necessarily not that good for everyone, because the strong migrations that are coming from the rural areas, and we have migration that can be economical, they can be, for education. But there is one very, very important point to me, which is this sort of lack of decentralization of the infrastructural service. especially around Africa, which surely create the main problem of not having the services in the rural areas, which we actually need. And again, so if we talk about like sustainability and how to make our city more sustainable, so how to fight all these challenges related to climate change or migration and all of that, well, you can't really disconnect the two things. And I mean, now that we have this huge new development, new cities, right? I think the main question should be for who are these cities? Like, who they're going to be the users of that? Because I'm an architect by profession, of course, and I practice too. But one of my main point is always, okay, as architects, what's our duty? For who are we working? I will still keep working for that 1% of the population, that is well off. But then again, on the other hand, we're talking about, there's lack of affordable housing in our cities, or the neighborhood, they're not that well. So this is one of the main issues. And another thing that go, like, I think, against this sort of idea of creating these new hyper cities that they're supposed to answer to the issues that we face in Africa at wide, is the fact that I believe that there is this strong westernization of the design of our cities in Africa, which I think is quite ridiculous. We have different weathers, we have different cultures, we have different way of living, but still we keep importing this old and not appropriate way of designing spaces, from houses to public spaces to cities at large in Africa. So I think that the question, I mean, one of the biggest advantage of our continent is the fact that we could learn from the mistakes that the West made during all these years, right? So we want to have more, better sustainable and resilient cities and communities. But well, then you shouldn't copy what they did. And sometimes actually copying that in a very bad way, which is not even at the same level of technological development, right? So I think that for our new cities to support sustainability, resilience, inclusivity, we need to kind of like detach from that sort of westernization, embrace more our cultures, identities, way of living, the way the communities interact. And there is where I believe that there is the answer for our future sustainable cities and design, right? So I think that is kind of my point. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Omar. I'm loving the way that the poetry is continuing from the beginning with Samira's poem, right, all the way from Senegal into the photography, into Cecil's contribution, and now yours, the ways in which you are speaking just about that, I guess the ludicrousness of trying to take templates from elsewhere and also not even doing them well and not listening to or learning from the lessons that are evidently there and available for us. So those are also resources. Thinking about resources not only as having an abundant kitty that you can dig into to make that dream manifest, but also the resource of what we have learned, what we can observe, and what we need to reclaim. I love, the way that you are speaking is so exciting in terms of, I think, even the sense of permission with the historical relationship we have with the West and the violent colonialism of it, and this binary that has ruptured that indigenous sense of connectivity, both to space, kind of borders we have created between city and urban, but also between countries, has wrought so much. Has wrought so much. I'm just going to leave it in that general realm. But yeah. As you spoke, I was imagining, like an animation artist would, the idea of these mirages or visions of the possibility of that ancient aesthetic in the future. So obviously ancient futures coming in, back to that spiral, that it is not about a discarding of or binary of either or, west or south or north or east. It's all of it. What is possible when we turn with that 360 degree to imagine an abundance that can include the beauty of what we had before. So it's a resurrection or remembrance of the wealth. Thank you so much for your input. And I look forward to us.
if I can, before I let you go, and I don't want to take more time, right? I just wanted to quote this because it always stick with me. There is the UNESCO in the Universal Declaration of Cultural Diversity, I think it was 2001, they declared that cultural diversity, as much as biodiversity, should be preserved for the benefit of present and future generation and represent the common heritage of humanity, which means that is exactly in our extreme beautiful diversity that we have in the continent that there is our strength, so we just need to embrace that, because we want to go to Dakar or Joburg or Mogadishu and feel that we are in different cities. I don't want to go to Dakar and feel that I'm in Paris, right? But yeah, so I just wanted to do that. Thank you.
Exactly, a kind of shopping mall experience. Come to this city and you can find a generic mall anywhere. Thank you so much. And moving on to our next speaker, Dr. Catherine Ewing. Welcome to the circle. We'd love to hear your inputs and see where it leads us to.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. I am just organizing my screen in the background to share my presentation. Oh. So my journey begins with a narrative from Gugulethu, a question of context. What are those flags flying high in the sky, and are they relevant to our neighborhood? This was a question asked by a local resident in Gugulethu. The flags represent the entrance to a small yet dynamic urban space, Itemba Walkway. This is my golden nugget, or a golden thread of hope, that I offer for today. But do they speak to informal strategies for placemaking in urban Africa today? Are these SDGs actually local action? And are they relevant to Itemba Walkway? And how do we define such things as safe, inclusive public space in the context of Gugulethu? I start with a quote from my colleague, Kolile. One of the greatest moments for me to see is a walkway which could symbolize hope, peace, and safety. A space for educational experience and knowledge. But we cannot do this alone. It needs to be a strategic partnership. And this is driven by passion and commitment. Itemba Walkway in Gugulethu is not just a space, but a global inspirational brand. To understand the spaces that are public against public space, we journey to other parts of Gugulethu. Reimagining neglected, dangerous, and undetermined public urban spaces offers the potential for social cohesion, integration, and connectivity. The intimate, interstitial, or fractional spaces of a city represent a key component of social infrastructure in the neighborhood. The myriad of urban space configurations in Gugulethu experience varying levels of exposure, accessibility, and safety, where most struggle to be politically acknowledged. Conventional monofunctional parks and sports fields and open spaces and green infrastructure that are zoned and administered by public open space are largely neglected or underutilized. In comparison, our incomplete grey spaces in Gugulethu have thrived as creative sites for microeconomies, community landmarks, and makeshift safe spaces together, albeit highly problematic. So I moved to a reframing and a definition on the role of public space in Gugulethu that explores the concept of fractional urban space. So fractions of space are argued as mini platforms for powerful change in local neighborhoods. Contextual issues can be identified at the place-specific neighborhood to not acknowledge that space is particularly transformative at the local area scale, albeit brittle. My story goes back to Itemba. There is a small neglected walkway that connects the roads of Dorotamana and Lolomkonto Road, commonly referred to as NY 5789 Paveway. But it is now recognized as Itemba Walkway. The walkway is a catalytic, community-driven public space that demonstrates active and responsible co-design and co-production driven by local agents of change in Gugulethu. Over the past 2 years, it has been that there have been many questions and far too many answers. Foreground to these questions is who delivers, who owns the space, where is the state, who cleans up the space, why do the lights not work? The background story reveals a committed community partnership that have become a constant presence, incrementally claiming the urban space, fraction by fraction. So I offer and I highlight 4 informal strategies for change. The first, innovative modes of spatial co-production, designing implementation projects for social intervention. Secondly, new forms of local agency, designing space to expand and contract with multiple stakeholder engagement. Thirdly, marginal ways of operating, designing for unexpected and unplanned micro-interventions and activities. And fourthly, interconnected and multi-scalar urban processes that allow for capacity building and social networks. Etemba walkway is, however, not seen in isolation. We have found 14 more walkways in Gugulethu and extra ones in Langa, in Khayelitsha, and many more. So in conclusion, radical change in urban space is persistent where the urban fabric is understood as an evolving system, hereby rendering the future of fractional urban space as ambitious, energetic, and most likely contested. Fractional spaces create adaptable sites for numerous political questionings, social conflict, and productive economies. Reimagining neglected urban spaces releases the possibility for connection and social cohesion, allowing fractional space to prosper through the smallest of intervention.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Those visuals are just so powerful. A sense not only of, bringing us literally to the ground, little bodies and navigating a space that obviously feels like home, that obviously feels like a connecting, what's the word? A connecting portal or bridge that is familiar to everyone, but also creates a sense of safety, and serves the substantial, being able to join find this, a safe way to navigate between spaces. Thank you also for your amplifying of this and highlighting of the small, because often the proposals for what we want to do and change and envision are so giant. It's a bit like those flags in the wind with the SDGs. That's wonderful, but what does it have to do with us? Where the translation of those visions isn't not broken down in a paternalistic or patronizing way, but literally the connection, like that little Etemba walkway, is not made. That kind of, and I think those are some of the points that were surfaced yesterday also in the cities that we have, where wonderful initiatives or efforts to create those conversations have lost a thread or those points of authentic contact somewhere along the way. And this returning opportunity is to recognize how the people themselves have been making those, joining those dots, innovatively, generatively, creatively, and also with an understanding of what their own need is. In other words, we'll tell the story of what we need in this space. So this would really help. So please don't build us a bridge to nowhere. This is how, this is what will serve us coming together. Thank you so much for your input. And that's definitely brought us to a very rich intersection in just over half an hour. In which I would love we really want to invite you to drop your comments or questions into the chat, and we'll circle back to you definitely. But here and now, I want to invite our next speaker, or rather a discussant, in response to what has been surfaced in the conversation so far. Please welcome Dr. Geshi Karuri Sebina. Hi, Geshi.
Hi, Malika. How are you?
Oh, I'm feeling really inspired and a lot more warm than the temperature around me, but I'm at this fire, so we'll be good.
Thank you so much for this invitation to participate, but also to just follow these really rich and diverse inputs we've just had. Should I go ahead now? Cool. So I'm really inspired by what has been shared by Cecil, by Omar, and by Catherine. And I had a few thoughts I'd sort of prepared, and they still feel adequate, I think, to bring into the conversation. And I think hopefully riff off of some of the ideas and images and questions. You know, Omar asks, for who are we talking? And I think that's resonated throughout. And I just want to pick up on this because in relation to our theme, I sort of thought of three big questions, right? So we're talking about the cities we want, and I think one of the underlying questions there is, who are we to want, right? And that's a question that this conference asks. And in regards to that, you know, and it's kind of alluded to in Catherine and Omar's inputs, in that there are a lot of invisibilities in who we are to want, right? There's invisibilities of who owns space, invisibilities of who uses space, even when it's evident. So not necessarily invisible to the eyes, but invisible to the processes that Cecile talks about that really create some of these futures. Invisibility is about what the rules are and who makes them. So what's on paper isn't always the rule. There are rules of the game by which city making happens. And so what we want, what we can want, what we're allowed to want is affected by those rules, but also what knowledges underlie that. And I think for me, that's in the latter part of my career, been the important piece is really to recognize how there are what we call these epistemicides, these ways of killing other ways of seeing and of knowing, and therefore of making sense of the city. And that's across, I would say, from even people using the city to people actively working in the spaces of architecture planning, but then also, I suppose, those who make decisions. So what knowledges inform that, and what do you think is credible knowledge around making these cities we want? So there are invisibilities. I think the second one is, I think there are diversities. There's a lot of othering in how we think about who we are to want. We other people based on age, you know, children, the elderly. Are these cities we want for them, or who are they for? We other immigrants all the time, everywhere, non-belongers, non-conformers, people who we think don't have a right to want anything. We other across class and income, you know, rich, poor. So there are all of these, you know, polarizations we have. And those diversities, even though we talk about wanting diverse cities, are very rarely a collective want, right, in terms of what we want. But then also the we itself, I was thinking, is complicated because we are multiple things. We are different times and we want different things at different times. We change our minds. We're contradictory. On the one hand, we want justice and beauty, but we also want comfort and the good life, the 1% life that Omar mentioned. And I think we have to also own up to the fact that we ourselves are complex. I think maybe the bottom line, as I was coming to in thinking through these different things that I think make it quite difficult to talk about who are we to want and who's even wanting, is that there is a power to occlude who gets to want and who gets the space to actually enaction those wants at different points in time. I think what has been much more difficult to control is the power of who gets to do. There are other spaces of power. There's spaces of action and agency that people can own and claim in spite of not being given that space to want. So I think there's obviously that question mark of who gets to, what wins, you know, do we get to do the cities we want or do we just get the cities we want to make? I think it's a very political issue. And I think tomorrow we get to talk about the cities we deserve. And that's an important conversation because I do think that those complexities and those contradictions affect that. But the second question, of course, is what are we to want? And I think Catherine was getting into this. So who decides? So if we say it's the cities we want, then what are we to want? So Teresh Govender and I have spent a lot of time working, I think he's known to many of you, really battling with these questions of imaginaries and power and politics of representation. And we've tried to really contest some of these very sterile, fixed imaginaries and inviting this idea of a collective, more imaginative engagement that allows us to envision some of those images of what the city should be and really invite different possibilities. But the reality is that it's not a simple question, right? So, and I'm going to share some links if you don't mind, because it's easier than me describing a whole context. So recently, I was involved in judging this Good Living contest, which just got announced, and I invite you to look at some of the images that came through. I'm very proud to say, but through no doing of mine, a South African image won as the top entry. But I mean, it was hectic judging a competition like this, because when we talk about images of a good future, what is good? What is compelling? What is possible? What is diversity? What is progress? What is beautiful? And to whom for all of the above? And in a simple little jury of, I think we were about 10 people, good golly, I mean, we begin to realize, and in fact, it was probably the most interesting part of it all for me, was just those, you begin to realize that we can be sitting here, the 10 of us, and we have completely different ideas about what any of those terms mean and what's important. And so it's not a simple thing to talk about for who. Even questions like, what are the continuities we seek? So there are things I'm sure that we think we hold as important and sacred, and we think a good future would have to have those things. So what are those things? What are the keepers? What are the ruptures? What are the things that require active disengagement, destruction, breakage? What are those things? Do we agree on that? But also, what is the room for surprise? And Malika, you talk about emergence, and it's so important. But within that, there has to be an ability to appreciate the otherwise, which is more than human. It's more than me and you. What's our agility to accept that? We just went through, well, if we're through COVID, so we discover in the moment that we can actually shapeshift. But what's our ability to understand ourselves as constantly having to do that, and that a good future may require that. So there's all of that, and I'm just aware of time, so I'm going to maybe just speed it up. My third question, so I talked about the first question was, who are we to want, and who's this wanting? What are we to want? And is that a simple question? And I'm suggesting perhaps it's not. The third piece I was thinking about is really a question of how are we to want? So if we don't want to accept the textbooks and the tablets that get issued from the multilateral agencies, then what are we, how do we go about this process of wanting? And I think there's a lot of interesting thinking that's happening in that space. I think in creative spaces, not necessarily calling itself to the cities we want, but really beginning to stimulate us and engage us in ways that are so precious. I thought one point of reference is some of the recent work of Joe Ravitz, and I'll put it on the chat as well, who's a collaborator. And so he put out this book just actually during COVID, which is called Deeper City. And part of what he does in a very compelling way and with lots of visuals is really to try and engage us in how collectives can really emerge into thinking about the future in very transformative ways and in very collective ways. And I think there are interesting ideas there. I don't know that it simplifies some of the questions that we are all raising, but I think it does begin to tell us that there's a possibility of seeing new space and developing new methods for how we can really move forward in not just talking about the cities we want, but really beginning to think about, well, what's the process? So 3 points I thought I wanted to emphasize. I think they pick up off of some of the comments made by previous speakers, but really just glad to be part of a continuing engagement around this super exciting question. Thanks, Malika.
Oh, what a joy, Getty. Thank you. You've actually taken us deeper into that spiral. When we spoke about tapestries and how there was resonance across these questions, even from yesterday and from the speakers before, you've helped us. We've zoomed out through the photography and the landscape poetry and the big issues. And there's something so powerful about how we've moved also from Catherine zooming into literally the powerful symbolism and visual language of that pathway or that walkway, self-created and localized, the small actions where the moments of surprise, as you speak to, and emergence and possibility at the fringes, so to say, or spaces that are treated like fringes when actually there's a lot of life happening there. You have really taken us deeper into the questions that we ask. So revisiting the questions themselves, which is really useful because that's a deeper digging And we thankfully we've been doing really well with time. So we want to take this conversation deeper. Thank you for those particular contributions. Also surfacing the ways in which those blind spots or invisibilities are a vital part of all the conversations, not only when we're wagging our fingers at the power mongers or the top-down, leaders who want to reinvent the wheel and save the people as opposed to listen to the people, or save the planet instead of listen to the planet. There's something really beautiful about being able, again, I keep coming back to this idea of spiraling, that we need to shift that perspective. This is what we are inviting by the conversations that have already emerged so beautifully. And then also in that rotation and that regenerative, let me visit that question again before I catapult into the megacity answer or the bridge answer. What is embedded, what assumptions are embedded in my question? And how harmful are those? And as you said, similar to, Cecil talking about, or was it, sorry, it was Omar talking about what we could learn from the West instead of taking the cookie cutter approach, is that similarly, what can we learn also from what COVID has taught us? We have all profoundly experienced, and as you said, not with any level of certainty or finality, that we learned about the power of emergence, of shifting ground, of how a sense of unsafety from the familiar created opportunities, surfaced and made visible connections that were available before, but until we were forced into proximity and to equality in the sense around masks and washing and sanitizing and how we navigated spaces and our bodies in relation to each other, we had to be humbled in that sense, to liberate ourselves from the answers and the positions of security, I guess, that we think we have. And so that's very much a creative, generative, messy human space, a humanizing space, to be human in the city and to recognize that the city is not a static thing, and neither are we, our evolving identities. Thank you for surfacing also that idea of diversity, that, when we pontificate about who the goodies and the baddies are in the scenario, we have to also own up to the mirror of those goodies and baddies. The government is us, is our choice, is the mirror of what we are contributing to and sustaining in some way. So I'm just really riffing off the things that you've offered. And also thank you for the resources that you put into the chat. I really encourage everyone to, take a copy of that, or, circle back and make a note so that you can find also the book about A Deeper City, which really, I think this is another thing that COVID has been. In isolation, many people, especially creatives and those working in the healing or transformative arts, have been generating huge bodies of work that are about that listening to the emergent space and the fears and sometimes the pain that has come up in that space. But what for is the question. What did it come up for? What do we need to slow down for? So let me not speak for another 30 minutes. We are now wanting to invite the last respondent into the space. Simon Bayinga, please join us with your input into the conversation. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Malika, and thank you very much to all the panelists who have done a very commendable job and giving us deep insights into the discussion today as we talk about the cities we want. So I come from a background of arts, and I come from an organization called KQ Hub Africa that is based in Uganda, trying to redefine the narrative and the shape of thinking or taking art into a deeper kind of imagination. So when we talk about art, when we talk about the cities we want, I want to bring a reflection on the previous speaker, what she talked about. we want? Who are we? Who are the constituents? Who are the people we are now talking about? Who are we, in fact? Like, because we realize that what is happening in most of the countries, like the African countries, is inheriting what happens in the Western countries, having a vision, having like a mind of thinking that, you know what, our city would look like Paris, our city would look like maybe England. But in a sense, this erodes the culture and the identity that we are talking about. And what brings about the identity, like as one of the speakers said, I don't want to go to Dakar and feel like I'm in one of the Western countries. The approach of art then helps us in building the city we want and in helping engage people at the grassroots level, at the rural level, because they are all interconnected at all levels, and bringing them to be part of the process of designing and shaping the cities we want. It's important to use it as a powerful approach in giving humans also a capacity to imagine, right? We realize that art draws responses out of people, therefore making the engagement a natural occurrence with no need to prompting is very important. They are by their nature prophetic, creative, and provoke thought, like the images we've been seeing in the exhibition, and we see that they have we have a deep-seated need to express emotions and imagination, and I think art is a medium that translates into form. So how do we shape our cities using art in the way we want them? So because art provides for us an avenue to tell a story, and taking in form of murals, installations, sculptures, this gives us the identity. I feel even when we talk about industrialization, when we talk about development, when we talk about transformation of the cities we want in Africa, we should be cognizant of the fact that we should not divert away from our identity. We should not divert away from who we are, from what we represent. So as the first speaker actually said, that cities should embrace nature. What is happening in some of the cities, like for example, in Kampala, the city that I come from, is that we have embraced industrialization, we have embraced development of cities, but we forget that there is a problem that we are creating that is called climate change. And in a sense, we're seeing that cities that had an identity, cities that were representing a certain form of context of a certain community or even a certain country, have eroded to be like flooding centers, like drainage centers. And this has really has taken away the beauty, has taken away the image in which we wanted these cities to be. So how can we really bring about creativity more central in the cities that we live in, especially in the cities we want? I think creativity is central. It is very important. And I think art is an approach that helps us to think about all alternatives in a way that is going to help communities imagine, that are going to help communities build the cities that they want. So creativity is a hidden treasure in so many cities. When you bring it to surface, its rewards can be seen, are enormous. So as cities develop over time, so does its identity, the culture, the historic, the economic characteristics, and the constant change that cities are subjected to. What used to be commercial cities have now deteriorated and turned into something else, right? What used to be very prestigious cities have turned into high-end cities where even people like rural people feel they do not belong there. So cities belong to a certain class of people. And yet we feel that these cities should belong to all people, regardless of their tribe, gender, race, and also intersections. So that's like very important. So I want to conclude this discussion in addition to what all others have said, that as cities or as time emerges, just the same with the passage of time, new approaches have to be developed within the design and appreciation of our urban spaces or cities. So focusing on art and creativity, a city can be revived and it can be transformed to create a new identity and a sense of place, which can be a place for everyone that can be enjoyed and lived by everyone. As we think of SDGs and saying by 2020, 30, we see these are not realistic kind of achievements that we get, but unless we evoke people to come and own their cities and take charge and design the cities they want, I think that's very important than leaving them to governments who are policymakers or even politicians. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simon. You don't have to convince me about the central role of artists and creativity. That's where I live, and I'm so happy that it does this Rise Africa Action Festival every year, and in all of its work is engaging with creativity as part of a central methodology of research, of documentation, of collaboration. And thank you for the particular points that you raised. The idea of erosion, both of identities, cultural identity practice in that effort to urbanize and also to improve facilities in the visions that are often downloaded or imposed rather than generated from engagement with community and workers in those spaces. The idea also that creativity is an innate human desire. So we're talking about the cities we want or desire or dream. And that in order to even have a sense of connection to that desire, there has to be an invitation, the ways in which we engage and recognize the resource of the people who live there and who call that city home. What is their creative resource that can contribute to that conversation, bringing in those identities that are at risk of erosion with the westernization that continues and is historical. I was thinking about identity. I mean, I don't know if that play on word has happened because we've heard some others earlier on with diverse cities, but thinking about also the densification that we've spoken about, that urban overwhelm, and now meeting the challenge of climate change that you've surfaced or highlighted, Simon, the idea that the threats of erosion are on multiple levels. They are literal, and perhaps like COVID, taking us to ground zero, taking us back, taking us inward, has also been not only about loss, but about a disturbing of structures that potentially didn't serve the majority anyway, and going back or having the opportunity for a wider scope and for a revival is the word you used, that is more inclusive from its foundation. So not an entire collapse or deletion of what was before, but in that muddy or messy in-between space, the kinds of questions we can ask are about spiraling back to what was, and also what we had or have in their, in their mixed states of service to the people, and what this window, what this portal of time is giving us including the fact that we know we are entering a continuum of change, that we are not thinking about models of our African cities that are structures that we feel are infallible, that are going to, survive it all. And a lot of the films that are coming out from even grassroots filmmakers are projecting us into that kind of scale of imagining the 2063 and beyond in terms of the environment. So even our images of what we think of when we say the word city, what comes into your mind? Is it something that we've seen before? Do we need to be holding that space for things we haven't seen before? Really tapping into imagination as well. It's not either or, but as well. Thank you so much to all our speakers for your contributions and for really disturbing the soil to create this generative opportunity for the conversation to now extend to everyone else in the room. And I think we do have some raised hands or questions and some very useful comments that have surfaced. I can't see at the moment, Tashi, if there are any hands raised, but please, we'd love to have your responses at this point for the next 20 minutes or so.
Malika, I might hop in quickly. This is Tashi speaking, just to remind everyone that they are welcome to toggle between the English and French channels. So should you want to ask a question and you would like it to be interpreted, or you would like to listen to the interpreted version of a question, just go to that little globe button at the bottom and you can toggle between English and French for what channel you're listening to.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Tashi. And Dominique, yes, we welcome your input. Are you muted?
Yes, merci Eva, c'est Eva je crois. J'ai juste ma petite contribution sur toutes ces interventions qui m'ont beaucoup édifié. C'est surtout pour ce qui concerne l'avant-dernière, je crois, intervention qui concernait qui nous sommes, la ville appartient à qui. En fait, je voudrais peut-être dire que il faut d'abord, pour que nos villes futures puissent ressembler à ce que nous voulons, qu'on tienne compte des éléments culturels. Il y a les éléments d'acceptabilité sociale qu'il faut conjuguer. Mais malheureusement, très souvent, en Afrique particulièrement, nous sommes en face de difficultés en rapport avec la gouvernance. Parce que la grande question, c'est de savoir est-ce que la ville doit être construite du bas en haut ou bien du haut en bas? Est-ce que c'est la population qui doit donner le tempo sur comment la ville doit être en tenant compte de leur réalité sociologique et culturelle? Parce que je pense que si on prend la ville sous cette forme-là, nous gagnerons au plan international en termes de multiculturalité, parce que la ville se donnera l'image même de la sociologie du milieu. Donc, qui doit s'occuper de la ville? C'est d'abord les occupants de la ville, c'est-à-dire les populations. Même s'il y a l'exode rural qui permet de construire la ville en termes de population et de diversité, il faut retenir quand même que dans une communauté africaine, il y a toujours cette harmonie entre les différents éléments culturels. C'est de mon point de vue ce qu'il faut faire pour pouvoir avoir des villes futures qui correspondent à ce que nous voulons en Afrique. Donc, pour me résumer, c'est en fait quoi? Un problème de gouvernance qui tient compte de la place de la population qui est utilisateur et bénéficiaire de cette ville, les éléments culturels de la ville, n'est-ce pas, et qui constitue un prérequis. Et c'est pour cela que il faut la connexion historique doit du passé au futur, doit être quelque chose de très important. Sans négliger la modernité qui vient vers la ville, elle doit s'enraciner sur les réalités sociologiques du milieu. D'abord, ça va faire un enrichissement culturel. Les gens seront contents, par exemple, de venir voir comment un peuple comme le peuple sénégalais ou bien le peuple camerounais ou le peuple, dirais-je, zambien vit à travers sa ville. C'est-à-dire, c'est ce que je voudrais voir dans la ville du futur. C'est mon point de vue là. Donc, la gouvernance politique doit être prise en compte. Il y a aussi les éléments de pauvreté parce que ce qui pose problème dans les villes en réalité, si on ne peut pas faire une bonne gouvernance économique, financière et politique en Afrique, nous allons tout le temps rêver des villes que nous n'aurons jamais. Donc, à la base, il faut d'abord que ceux qui parlent au nom de la population soient des personnes qui les représentent effectivement. Parce qu'ils ont été bien élus naturellement. C'est d'abord dans un premier temps. Mais vous savez que chez nous, ce n'est pas toujours le cas. Si on peut arriver à une bonne gouvernance qui permet que ceux qui parlent et décident au nom de au nom de la population qui voudraient vivre dans un environnement sain, dans un environnement qu'ils veulent, il faudrait qu'il y ait en amont une bonne gouvernance politique, une bonne gouvernance économique, une bonne gouvernance financière. Merci, c'est ma petite contribution. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Dominique. Thank you for bringing those threads in. Absolutely, there's a complexity that we have to engage with, and we've been speaking about this in many ways. Also, the idea of exclusion and erasure of the wealth that is available to us through the people who are expressing their cultures and are the keepers of culture. Also, we've raised the point about ownership in terms of, even if we wanted to have a say in the cities that we dream, the question of governance is how are those voices heard, engaged? Anyway, I won't repeat what you've said. I just want to thank you for your input and also to bring attention to another point that has been raised or comment in the chat by Nomvolo Dlamini around the influx of people from different parts of the continent, and Geshi's response around the sensitivity of the notion of influx and experiences of urban settlement, opinions about that, because sometimes, again, we have to recognize that the very language we use can be perpetuating the kind of exclusion. But perhaps I can ask Nomvula if you'd like to speak that question into the space, and Geshi if you'd want to add.
I'm hoping Nomvula will speak in.
Nomvula, are you here? Okay, we have a lot of questions coming in. Maybe we can follow up with your input. Some of the other comments about, smart African cities with AI, but how do they keep this, the city alive in a smart city? Questions around ownership of this technology, who benefits economically from it, and this also the dangers of the mall syndrome, that homogenization that we've been alerting as well. I think Catherine's comment at some point, we can resurface or circle back to the idea of governance and reframing this notion of governance that includes financing, partnership, and a policy mismatch with reality on the ground. And Wabwire, this is the hand I can see right now. Welcome. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. This is a very, very, very interesting conversation. And I just wanted to add to what my colleague Simon was speaking about. I think the cities we want must have or must take a deliberate investment in the creative art industries so that we can power the imagination of the future, you know. For instance, an investment in public art, more theater spaces, more galleries, more festivals, because these spaces actually allow young people to reimagine and also contribute to the cities we want, because people in these spaces are taking up the most important role, that this is how we want to live in these cities, you know, the kind of music that is coming out from, for instance, look at what is coming from South Africa, Amapiano, you know, look at what's coming from West Africa, Afrobeats, you know, this is the sound of the future, you know, and it's shaping how people think about our cities, you know. There's also a more deliberate investment in cultural exchanges and artistic encounters, which give artists the agency to design, co-create, and contribute to a new future, you know. Architects are very important because they are, for instance, reimagining new housing that is sustainable for our cities. And we don't have to replicate the Western architectural narratives, you know, because we can invest in our own architects to think about what futures we want, because then it's inbred and it's from home, you know. For instance, also visual artists beautifying our public spaces with murals and social messages. Right now, I'm in the UK, and the city mayor is actually advocating for an investment in the visual arts. You know, we need to beautify our cities, and we need to give power to the mural artists, not just to put out messages of what they think the city should look like, but to also contribute to beautifying these cities, you know, and working directly with, let's say, florists, working directly with people in agriculture, because right now the conversation is how do we also green our cities, you know. There is a deliberate need for working with people in the horticulture, gardening and all that, so that we can actually put designated spaces where trees, we can bring back the sustainability we've always reimagined. Because of industrialization, there's been a deliberate move by corporates to take away what is beautiful and make us think that the cities we want should be more centered around capitalistic input and output, you know. And I think that's very, very problematic, you know. We need cities that work for all of us, not for a few, you know, and that means we have to deliberately take that. Thank you. I would have said very much, but that's it.
Thank you, Wabire. I think you are really, it feels like a kind of invocation, this conversation that has been a sentiment that has been circling before and in this conversation, and I'm sure it will continue. In the chat, we've had some really poignant and useful commentary that's continuing. And before we go back go back to the, we do have to have the little window of time to look at the shortlist and winner of the urban photography competition, which again centralizes art, centralizes different ways of exploring and expressing our narrative, also as ways of documenting and using cultural heritage through a range of media to remind us of our identities and ourselves in the spaces that can help us to also feel more at home in those spaces, a sense of ownership, of agency, of creative permission to bring life into those cities through our arts, because just our existence in those spaces and the ways in which we work in them and serve them is already the lifeblood. So what I want to ask is because I think we are going to run out of time, is to just circle back for a brief concluding comment from our original speakers. I think you also set us off in such a powerful direction. Can I please invite Cecil Madel back to just make a wrap-up comment around what you've heard surfacing in the conversation, or even a point that may have been in the chat.
Thanks, Malika. Thanks very much for the fascinating discussion, and and also your response. I think I found it really exuberating, and I think we definitely need greater interaction between artists and poets, people involved in poetry, and people that are currently shaping and constructing the city on a daily basis. The state and municipalities and governance and private sector. People talk about private sector development, and so I think maybe just to emphasize the comment I was making is that the way our cities have been, and Simon also talks about it, have been structured and shaped over the colonial and post-colonial period is very much entrenched. And there's a very strong kind of trajectory on what the city should look, and the shape of it in terms of infrastructure. And we all know, the consequence of that. And I think that's the only thing I'm kind of pleading for is that we have to, you made the comment about we are the government, we are the state, we the government, but I think there's diversion between what the state is pursuing and what we need and what we want and what we desire. And well, we obviously are. So I think we mustn't forget about engaging the state at that level of where it's constructing, designing, the way it formulates its budget, the kind of infrastructure it's providing at a city scale. That has a massive implication on how where people live, where people get settled, what kind of environments they're exposed to, what infrastructure they actually have access to. So I think it's a dual kind of engagement. I think we need the bottom up and the top down, as you've mentioned before. But thanks very much for this fascinating discussion. Let's keep on taking it forward in other platforms also. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Cecil. And yes, definitely, these conversations can't be contained in just under 2 hours. And as you're saying, the kinds of inclusive thinking around who should be in those conversations, so that even when we say we are revisiting what we means and who as we exclude in the past in the ways that shape those proposals for change. And I think one of the points that was raised in the chat, I don't know if it was Namvula, particularly the idea around that sometimes government or municipalities' lack of acknowledgement about what artists and creatives or cultural activists have actually done in the city over time. So often there's a kind of a handout of a limited budget and usually a ridiculous time frame which to produce work without thinking about its preservation. For example, if you're thinking of murals or site-specific sculptures, the work that really engaging those contributors to the city's life and land and future and vision and identity on consulted about how those works are taken care of. I myself have had work around slavery or heritage in museums and spaces where it's not, we don't have the capacity as the ones who create the work to ensure that the maintenance of that work happens, or that we document it sufficiently to be able to draw on that resource, to recognize the archive of efforts that have actually been made before. It's both about acknowledging that wealth, which is also what we kind of alluded to at the end of yesterday's conversations, is that there are assets here. And if we speak with a poverty consciousness, and if we speak with the top-down or paternalistic way of relating to the people of the city and the cultural activists in that space, artists, then those just by the nature of how we host or don't host that conversation inhibits what's possible for where we want to go. Thank you. Omar, please, can you give an input as your concluding comment to this part of the conversation?
Yeah, so it has been quite interesting, and I'm reading now some of the comments that I touch very interesting points. Well, first of all, we mentioned briefly about arts and the importance of arts, right? And they say that arts speak the language that we don't have the courage to speak, but the one that we need to hear, right? So I think, of course, it's important, and all of us in different capacity, we kind of work within that. But in here, there is one of the comments that I just want to take a second that ask if we build the future African cities on the frame of cities for people or cities for profit. And well, the cities shouldn't never be like for profit directly. It should be like an indirect consequence of the fact that you build the city for people, and then, you know, tourism and interaction and all of that is coming. Then, of course, we have the extreme case of Dubai, which is probably entirely made for profit in that sense. But that only happened when you have cities that didn't embrace their cultural and heritage and identity and things like that. So I think we are pretty fortunate in that sense within the continent that we are very rich. I think we're just very bad at marketing. So probably we just need to change that. But like, I think that talking about the city that we want, and if I can conclude in that sense, is that if we want a city that is inclusive, that is resilient, that is like sustainable, that is beautiful and livable, well, you know, you need to build the city in a human scale. So you need to understand the human needs, the people needs of everyone, not just like a small percentage of the population, not just, you know, someone mentioned we have like people coming from different countries around the continent, and then the cities change. But that has been like that for thousands of years, right? And exactly. Africa, you know, we have borders that are not even made by us, right? So, you know, movement of people. In this, again, I wanted to quote this because I think it's a very, very important part, right? This sort of division that is keep pushed, right? Or divided cities, divided communities, divided ethnicity, you know, it's just a crazy thing to think. So I think that us as African, we've been like the best in the world of welcoming people from issues, like having this transition, connecting with everyone. And the cities that we want, or that I want at least, should be like that, should be open, should be welcoming, should be inclusive. You know, you shouldn't have like issue related to, you know, gender or ethnicity or social background or religion, you name it, right? So and last but not least, and then I close in here, what can we do? There's one, you know, a lot of people tend to give the responsibility to government and governance, which of course, you know, that's the big scale, that's the thing. But when you have to employ someone and you do a renovation of your little cafe, are you gonna call a local artist? Or are you just like buy like something from, I don't know, from
Coca-Cola,
Alibaba or whatever, and just like attaching that? Are you like believing in your community? Because if you don't believe in your community, but they complain that nothing changing, then you're also part of the problem, you know? So if you want to see a change, you need to be that change.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Omar.
Thank you to you, to all of you, and thanks for having me.
Thank you for those reflections. Talking also about that disconnect, you know, and the lack of inclusivity. Catherine, could you input? I just keep coming back to this visual of that question of connectivity and the opportunity of small scale encounters that, you know, that are also more likely to have a sense of community ownership. But whatever you want to say, let me not coerce you.
No. I mean, I'm really grappling with the notion of the we, and, you know, like, who is this we involved in? And the we often starts in transformative language in terms of the I. So, you know, it's my values and my beliefs, and the I becomes a bigger we and the collective. But I'm very aware of the blind spots, and I think you mentioned that previously. And it's in how do we recognize those blind spots? And even if we are doing or working with communities with very bottom up perspectives, it's that notion that there's this disconnect between you know, kind of what we put on the ground in terms of policies and what is happening. So this need to plan and act at the same time becomes a more evolving process rather than a very linear process, which I think is how we've always designed cities in kind of a modernist era sensibility. So that idea of going back to understanding, you know, cultural identities from the bottom is so crucial. And those smaller spaces, or the spaces that are undocumented, they're not even on the radar. They are considered, sort of unwanted. They're too much hassle. But yet those are the spaces that community can feel. And I go to Amar's question, they're human. And they impact people, and they impact children and youth. And I think if we can't actually understand that, then we've missed that notion of what do we want. So the red flags and the blind spots in kind of bringing those up, and I think we have a role to play in making sure that those small spaces actually do reach platforms and forums to create exchanges and at different levels and different scales. And we always talk about it at almost cities at one scale, and it's like these multiple scales that I find are deeply layered, and sometimes we try and unpack them in too much detail without listening to actually what is being said.
Yes.
I wrote down here, listening to an emergent space is what I value about the cities we want.
Yes.
So it's not the cities I want; it's the cities that we want, and the hidden treasures.
Thank you. There's two things that are really resonating for me, just also in what Omar has said, in just again, these really powerful questions. I think a question as a spade, so what has it dug up for us? And before we go and try and build something or shape something, what is that lovely emergent space? Also thinking about emergence as the new or the fresh or the young blood. Are we going to invite artists from the community or even the youth to be those amplifiers and collectors of the stories? It's a very affirmative, confidence building activity to go out and ask your community, and do that kind of research, not just in a journalistic sense, but capturing the stories, the voices, and the articulations, where even an intergenerational conversation begins to happen in those spaces. And whatever the changes are also impacting us differently. Whatever's been shifting, whether it's climate change impacts or COVID impacts or economic impacts, they have particularities or things ends to the story that can be articulated, and are impacting us differently, even across those generational lines, if you want to call them. And the last thing I wanted to think about in relation to what you've just shared is the fact that there are, as we've been saying, there are resources already. What has already done? So, for example, the Children's Radio Foundation has for the longest time had award-winning work in which young people are the researchers and the producers of shows for radio, which is an accessible medium that allows them to tell their own stories, but also stories of their places while gaining a skill. And that's not an astronomical budget to do that kind of work. So it's also just revisiting what kind of initiatives have already been here, what assets are already in space, what wealth is already in this community that we can tap into. Thank you. And I would now like to ask Geshi to come back in just with a concluding comment, and then Simon, before we go and have a look at who the winners are for the competition.
Thanks, Malika. And I'll be very brief because I really do appreciate the previous input. And I also just noticed the important question Tanika was asking on the chat about, in a way, these contradictions, the fact that these, there are different things happening and they have different timelines and different expectations. And I appreciated, I think, the comment just now that Catherine made about recognizing, modernity in all of this, and that we don't always get to disengage or set apart the things that are legacy or that are very foundational in who we are to do something different, right? So I thought the best thing I could do is to share two resources that might be very familiar with everybody already. If they are, it's a reminder. If they're not, maybe look them up. But I have really appreciated the writings of Vanessa and Rioti in terms of just this question of how we dream, imagine, make change in the times we're in. And so if anybody hasn't read her book, I think it's quite a powerful resource. So speaking of resources, a second one that I actually only found about quite recently, and it's a methodological one, and it relates to this question of we, but also recognizing the I, and the you in the we, is this idea of the bus as a methodology, as a way to perhaps have colonial conversations, but also I was trying to argue for evolving the methods. And I think that's what people are asking is, how do we do this? It's not easy. And so my current pursuit is to look for methods. A lot of it also, and I think a few people have alluded to this, is in practice. We've got to do those experiments. We've got to do those small things. We've got to see what people are already doing and try and make sense of it. So I hope these little resources help. And again, just thank you for allowing me into this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Geshi. Did you drop those into the chat?
Yeah, I popped them into the chat.
Fantastic. Thank you. Simon, would you like to have a last word?
Yeah, I mean, thank you very much, Malika, for this opportunity, and thank you to Rise Africa for offering us this opportunity to be part of this very passionate discussion that every time we work towards achieving. So in building, in thinking about the cities that we want, cities that are resilient, as Omar said, sustainable and livable, there has to be an inclusive approach of engagement. Bottom down, up bottom, but in all ways there has to be an inclusive approach. And an inclusive approach may not leave arts and culture behind. So it also falls in that line. So the structure and design of a city is integral to the way in which communities come to use its space. Because communities come and use it, then they have to own it. It has to be them, it represents them. So, and they use it like for so many factors or for so many uses, like recreation, work, residential, and that is true even of art, where it thrives and where it's created and where it's consumed. So it's important to reimagine. It's important to put up spaces that help young people, the future generation, to reimagine, to think about what the cities they would want to build, even the communities themselves that are left behind because they are seen as powerless. There is intersectionality. So that's like very important. I can only say thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being on the panel of so many brilliant brains and also people listening, and looking forward to continuing this discussion and being part of the future conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
bye
Simon.
from Uganda. Yeah.
We see you again, hopefully even this evening. There's an opportunity at 6 p.m. for everybody to circle back and reflect on the sessions and speakers that have surfaced so much wealth for us to grow and generate further into that future realm. Also, we are now going to have the opportunity to look at or the shortlisters, and then the winners for the Rise Africa 23 Action Festival multimedia competition. I can only call it photography, but of course it's more. So welcome back, Luca. Take us through that final loop as an end to our feast of time together. Thank you everyone who has been present here. Look forward to engaging with our conversation also tomorrow for the third and final day of the festival. Please look at the program, register for the sessions. In fact, stay with us the whole day if you can. There's a lot more that we can share in that space. Thank you, Luca. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Malika. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all again and to start us off on the actual announcement of the winners, or rather the finalists and the one winner of this competition. We are fortunate enough to actually have one of our 4 judges who will be announcing the winners. But before I hand over, I think it would be remiss of me not to introduce and just thank all of our judges who participated in this process. I was quite fortunate enough to make contact with a wide variety of fascinating and very generous photographers and multimedia visual artists from across the continent throughout this process. And the 4 judges that participated in choosing the finalists of this competition include Katumba Badru, who is a multi-award-winning freelance photojournalist who is based in Uganda and who balances a highly creative and detail-driven documentary style. It also included Chris de Beer Proctor, a queer photographer and photojournalist based here in Cape Town, South Africa, who specializes in documentary photography and portraiture, and who is often compelled to tell stories around social justice, particularly from an LGBTQ and gender lens. Our 3rd judge for this competition was Mario Makilau, a multidisciplinary artist and activist as well, who is best known for his photographic work, particularly often in black and white. And he is considered one of the many key figures in a new generation of emerging Mozambican artists. And last but certainly not least, our 4th judge included Dr. Fumi Adeniji, who is a manager of the rights-based approaches here at Equalise Africa, who has more than a decade of cross-sectorial experience in various sectors and has a particular passion in coordinating and creating projects with a human rights-based framework, and who contributed that valuable lens to the process of selecting a winner for this competition. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Katumba Badru to our audience, who will be walking you through the decision-making process and some of the elements that stood out about the 3 finalists for this competition. I will be sharing my screen of these submissions, of which Katumba will then be speaking. So without further ado, please take it away. Has been dropped from here. So Katumba, are you there? Are you able to come through, and can everyone hear Katumba?
Yes, I'm here. Can I say good afternoon or what time it is? So it's been a pleasure listening to all of you and your submissions. I've learned quite a number of things from almost every one of you, and I'm glad to be to do this. Going straight to the point, we received several entries in this year's photography multi judging. So we had, however, we had so many discussions back and forth with the judges, and because we come from different parts of Africa and we have different societies, we are shaped differently. So at some point we were not agreeing on what the winning entry was, or what submission should take the first and second place or third place. But at some point we had to zero down, given the perspectives and points that were given by different judges. So the winning entry was from Accra, Ghana, and it was reviving African unity. And why we chose this particular entry, because of how basic the technique. That's not just one picture, but there's a series. The technique that was used by the photographer or artist was really simple and straight to the point, because in his submission, he wanted to portray a city. His idea of a good city is one which has transport that is uniting everyone. And within this, he was like, he needed public transport instead of everyone having their own way of commuting to work or back from work. And in the process, they would use the space or the time when everyone is in that matatu or taxi to talk about the issues in the community. Say for this particular picture, talk about the climate change, tree planting, and how best they can, have these debates. Because now that everyone is in their gates or surrounded communities, it's rare that people meet and have these deep discussions of what they need in the city. So as they go home or coming to work, the artist thought they can use that time to talk about what's affecting in the community, what's working and what's not working. So that's why we chose this as the best or the winning entry in this year's. And then the other was from also Ghana. What's wrong with Ghana? Should I shift to Ghana? Looks like artist there. So Ghana, in this one, the artist more so wanted to, to have a continuity, like let the old generation pass on their knowledge, let them pass on their wealth, let them pass on their, ambitions to the young ones. Let them teach us. We are in a country where we see, for example, presidents that are too old for life, and they have the knowledge, but they can't pass that knowledge on to young people, so that we can also take shape of what the countries we want or the cities we want. So this was also a series of pictures, but we chose this one, and we made the artist to go for second place because of basically the beauty and the technique, and also what the pictures were about. The third entry was from Kenya. Hello, East Africans, we got someone representing. So the third entry was from Kenya. This was an art piece, and it was straightforward to the point, and it matched very well with the theme. The artist described very well how the cities, rich or poor, can all merge or can all come out to demand for the same, like good housing, good industries, clean and vibrant streets, good policies that affect everyone, playgrounds, good transport and road. We realized that was a deserving entry for third place, and that's why it's there. This judging was done by 4 judges, and we all agreed to the best 3 entries that won this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katumba. I think that you did an almost impossible job of speaking incredibly well to the core of each of the 3 finalists and what stood out and what could, be drawn out to reach a consensus between our 4 judges. And these 3 finalists, truly do represent the breadth of styles and focus points that we received throughout this process. So thank you everyone for for joining us on this journey. And with that, I'll then hand back over to our facilitator, Malika, to close off the session.
After all this time, still grappling with the muting situation. Anyway, thank you, Luca and Katuba, and thank you and congratulations to and the finalists. We also want to just express our deep gratitude from ICLEI Africa side and RISE Africa to all the contributing speakers. You really enriched this conversation with us and gave us a lot to take away, both into reflections later this evening, but also that will feed further and dig deeper into that soil of the conversations in tomorrow's third day of the festival. So please register, take a look at the program for the day. We'd love to have your participation in whatever form or for however short or long as we navigate the cities that we deserve. And we'll still be playing with the porousness of that idea of the we. And certainly I have no doubt that the facilitator, Funmi, tomorrow is going to have a very rich conversation around notions of deserving and who the givers and the receivers are in that equation. Thank you so much for your listening, for your enthusiastic responses in the chat, and we wish you well with the rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you.